I don't know what comes to your mind when you sing, "He has done marvelous things." There are a lot of ideas that would fall under what we were just singing about. But the fact that he brings so many people from diverse backgrounds together into one body in the church, the fellowship that we have, the friendship that we enjoy, just the way that we share our lives together, I think is one of the really wonderful, wonderful things that God has done. In visiting with Greg this week, I don't know if the church throughout the country is healthy, or if I just get invited to healthy congregations. But if I was a member of a congregation like this, I wouldn't want to do anything to mess it up. You're friendly. Every time I've been here, and I think this is my third visit, you have a real gift for hospitality, for making people feel welcomed and encouraged. Your singing is excellent. I don't know what the acoustics here have to do with that. By the way, I don't want to compete with rain ever again. That was rough. I started to wonder if you could hear me. I thought about just offering the invitation and getting out of here, but this has been a good couple of days, and thank you. Obviously, I pray about these things. I prepare. I want you to be encouraged. I want you to know I'm encouraged. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share these ideas with you. We're thinking in terms of life. And if Christianity's like a race, there are hurdles that we have to get over. And the 6 specific challenges that we've looked at so far, dysfunction, betrayal, temptation, persecution, resentment, prosperity. I had a little fun because I didn't update my PowerPoint. Clay's been so good to help me advance all the slides and keep everything up. But then I kind of made him nervous when I had a word on the PowerPoint that wasn't in my outline. But that's where we've been so far. Tonight, it's interesting, the dreams that Joseph had when he was still at home, kind of in his childhood, the dreams that made his brothers so angry, and even got what I would describe as an uncustomary rebuke from his father. Joseph has these dreams, and they're going to kind of come into play tonight. In the first dream, you remember his sheaf stood upright, his brothers stood all around, bowed down to his. The second dream, which is really an expansion of the first, the sun, the moon, 11 stars bowed down to him. And all of that indicates not just his brothers, but his father and mother would come and bow down before him. Well, we've reached the part of the story where those dreams become reality. And that unexpected turn of events, it brings about a unique challenge. It gives Joseph an opportunity to get revenge. Of all the other challenges Joseph had to endure, this one had to be extremely difficult. To be in a position to hurt the people who did so much to hurt him. We'll circle back to this at the end, but if you would think for just a moment, there are people in our lives, it doesn't take very long that their face comes to your mind, an unpleasant memory. You can find it, access these words that were spoken, hurtful words, hateful behavior. And there are people in our lives, they've hurt us. And what would you do if you were in a position to hurt the people who have done so much to hurt you? Well, we're going to see tonight what Joseph did. First of all, and this is just, obvious, everything we've looked at so far, he was obviously a victim of evil treatment. The New International Version of 1 Corinthians 13, verse 5, love keeps no record of wrongs. Are you keeping records? Do you keep accounts? Not necessarily something you've documented, written down or typed into a computer, but in your mind. Do you keep a very careful account of these people, what they've done, how they've hurt you, how they've hurt others? Love doesn't do that. But I want you to think for a moment tonight, what if he had not been determined to live a life of love? What if he yielded his heart to hatred instead? If he had a list of people that, when I finally arrive, when I'm finally in a position to get revenge, who would have been on the list? The names, the very first names you'd imagine would be on the list. If Joseph ever made a list like that, would it be the names of his brothers who conspired to kill him and then decided instead to sell him for 20 shekels of silver? And then they concocted that story that was so believable that it convinced their aging father that Joseph had been killed by a wild animal. And he became aware of all of that. As they were talking in front of him, when they didn't realize that they were appearing before their brother and they were speaking in their own language, not realizing because he was using an interpreter that he understood every word that they were saying, he finally came to understand all that they did to hurt him, to deceive his father. Boy, if he had a list, if he was keeping a record of wrongs, his brothers' names would have been on that list. I think next on the list of those who had so grievously sinned against him, you can imagine he would have added Potiphar's wife's name to that. Not only did she make his life a daily nightmare by constantly testing his virtue, but then when he refused her sexual advances, she made up an awful lie and accused him of attempted rape. Can you imagine? To destroy somebody's life. Look, I said yesterday, and I feel very blessed to work in an environment of Christians. And I know that even in that environment, sometimes people don't behave in a way that is a positive reflection of our Savior. But in my experience, I've had the privilege to work with good and godly people. You may go to work and every day you're surrounded by people who make it difficult for you to live up to the level of your faith. And it may not be like this story where she was constantly propositioning him, blatantly inviting him to have an inappropriate sexual relationship with her. You may go to work every day and you're pressured to be dishonest. And you're pressured to maybe charge people in ways that really call your integrity into question. There are all kinds of things that you may have to deal with in your workplace that make every day a battle. Well, every day was a battle for this young man. Every single day he had to resist her advances. And when he did that successfully, I can't imagine why anybody would do this, but we know it happens. We know that it has happened. There are very public stories where someone's life and reputation, career, these things have been totally destroyed by accusations of sexual misconduct, and then you find out years later, the person comes forward and they say, I just made the whole thing up. And even after the fact, even after an admission of a false accusation is made, there are so many people who never hear kind of the retraction of the false charges, and that person's reputation for the rest of their life. People believe that they did what they were falsely accused of doing. Well, in this case, this young man who's already been sold into slavery is now falsely accused of making unwanted advances towards his master's wife, and he ends up in prison. If I'm going to get somebody back, if I'm going to pay back someone who has hurt me, don't you think you'd put that lady's name on the list? So his brothers, for obvious reasons, Potiphar's wife. I think he might be inclined to put Potiphar's name on that list. In the early verses of Genesis 39, it's clear that Potiphar not only saw that the Lord was with Joseph, but he seemed to understand that it was God who made Joseph succeed in everything he did. Verses 5 and 6, from the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian master because of Joseph. That the blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So he left in Joseph's care everything he had with Joseph in charge. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Why would he believe that false charge that his wife made against this young man? He'd prospered so greatly because of the service of such a trusted and dependable servant. And yet he has Joseph confined to prison based on the circumstantial evidence of an abandoned garment and the unsubstantiated charges of a promiscuous wife. These are people that hurt him, his brothers, his master's wife, by extension then his master. Maybe there'd be one more name on that list. The cupbearer who at least for a short time had been a fellow prisoner along with Joseph. When we talked about that story, we mentioned the fact that if Joseph made a stronger appeal for help to any other individual, there's no biblical record of it. It may be the only time that the inspired account gives us some glimpse, the word resentment, the word bitterness. But when he says, listen, all of the unfair things that happened to me, what my brothers did, what my master's done to me, I shouldn't be here. And when you get out, please remember me. Please don't forget me. He gives an accurate interpretation of the dream. He outlines the unfair predicament that then he makes that heartfelt request. It's going to be well with you. And when it is well with you, remember me. I shouldn't be here, and you're going to be in a position to help me. He pleads with the man to remember him, to show kindness to him, to make mention of him, to get him out of that prison for whatever reason. When the cupbearer is restored, he forgot all about him. And we mentioned, the language of chapter 41 and verse 1. 2 full years had passed. If Joseph had been the type of person to keep a record of wrongs, it wouldn't be hard to imagine the cupbearer's name being on that list. He's victimized over and over again by his brothers, Potiphar's wife, Potiphar himself, a forgetful friend, one to whom he made such an impassioned plea. when we talk about getting over the hurdle of revenge, we're not talking about that because we don't have any reasons. We're not saying, boy, this is a difficult hurdle to get over because everybody's always been kind and gracious. The reason it's so hard to navigate through this life in a way that you're faithful to God and you're following Jesus is because sometimes people give us very good reasons to want to hurt them back. He had good reasons. And then he's finally in the perfect position to take revenge. Nobody could have predicted the trajectory of his rise from prison to the palace. It's exactly what took place and when it did. Kind of amazing. I said last night, it's riches to rags to riches. He's the favored son of a wealthy father, but then he's a slave and a prisoner. And now, the rise to power, position, influence, it's really kind of amazing. After successfully interpreting Pharaoh's dream, and he's very wise. He's mapping out a plan of action. And as he's doing all of this, Pharaoh reaches the conclusion, no one is as discerning or wise as this man. And so based on that assessment of Joseph's qualifications, he promotes him to a position of unprecedented power and authority. In Genesis 41, 40 through 44, just 5 things, if you'll listen to them. You shall be over my house. All my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. I've set you over all the land of Egypt. And then number 5, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. I think that's incredible what he said to this young man. This is a boy that it just seems like in the previous scene, he was in a prison. He had to shower and shave and change. They just called for him out of a life of incarceration, and now he has been promoted. That there's only one person in what is the mightiest nation in the world at that time, had to be one of, if not the most powerful nations. And Pharaoh says, you are the greatest in this country except for me. And then he says, and then we kind of get a glimpse of that power in action. The 7 years of plenty which were in the land of Egypt ended, and the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had said. And the famine was in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Notice this. And Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph, and whatever he says to you, do. The famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine became so severe in the land of Egypt. So all countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain because the famine was severe in all lands. When the people came to Pharaoh, they're running out. Joseph said, we've got to save, we've got to put back in the years of plenty. Here's what I recommend. Let's take a certain amount, a fifth of all the kind of the muchness, the abundance. Let's put that back, because then these lean years are going to come, and that's what's going to see us through. And then everything that he predicted based on Pharaoh's dream becomes a reality, and the people are in need, and they come to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, go talk to Joseph about it. That's the position that he's in. Do whatever he says to you. And not just to the people of Egypt, but to the surrounding countries when they came to buy grain. You might notice that they didn't appear before Pharaoh. Instead, they came to Joseph because Pharaoh had put him in charge. Chapter 42 and verse 6 says he was governor over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. There's a reason. Chapter 42 and verse 6. There's a reason that Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the ground. At home, we're working through some of the spiritual disciplines, and we spent a whole month just talking about prayer. One of the lessons we had on prayer was biblical postures of prayer. And it's interesting. However you feel about, raising your hands, bowing your head, kneeling. Well, one of the most common postures of prayer is for people to fall down on their faces before God. And that's what the lesser does before the greater. The weaker does before the stronger. The one who is great. When you come and ask and petition before him, you humble yourself. Well, that's what his brothers did when they came in need of food. There's a reason they did that. And again, in chapter 43 and verse 26, they bowed down before him to the earth. And in verse 28, they bowed their heads down and prostrated themselves. In chapter 44 and verse 14, they fell down before him on the ground. And the reason that they paid homage to Joseph can be summed up in his own words. After he made himself known to his brothers, and he told them not to be grieved or to be angry for having sold him into Egyptian bondage. He then explained to them in no uncertain terms. This is chapter 45 and verse 8. It was not you who sent me here, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and Lord over all his house, and ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. He's the father of Pharaoh. He's the Lord over all the house of, over all his house, a ruler throughout the land. It's within his discretion to dispense justice, to get revenge on those who have falsely accused him, wrongfully abused him. And see, that's what lesser men would have done. Some men elevated to such a high position might have used their position of power to pursue vindictive vendettas. There's an idea of festering resentment. It's eating away at you. There are some things that have been so painful in our lives that we can't help. We rehearse it. We play those scenes over and over again in our minds. Sometimes we think to ourselves, if I ever have the opportunity, I will get them back. That's not the way that Christian people are supposed to think, but it's hard sometimes to get over the hurdle of revenge. There's not a hint in the Word of God that Joseph considered that he ever even had a moment where he thought to himself, now they're in my hands. Now I'll make them pay. In Genesis 50, in verse 15, we're told that when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, perhaps Joseph will hate us. He may actually repay us for all the evil which we did to him. They knew what they did. They knew how much harm they had caused. And in their own minds, Maybe this is what they would have done if somebody hurt them. If they were in the position Joseph was in, maybe they would have used that power to exact revenge, and they're afraid. Maybe he suspended that inclination towards revenge as long as our father was alive, but now he's gone. We have nothing to shield us from Joseph's vengeance. And it wouldn't be too difficult to see why they might feel that way. They had every reason to feel insecure after Jacob died. But the truth is that Joseph never sought vengeance. I want you to think about some of what he did. During his brother's initial visit to Egypt to get food, he commanded the steward of his house to fill their sacks with grain, to restore every man's money to his sack, and to give them provisions for their journey. He not only, he had it within his discretion to say, oh, you're coming for food? You're coming for grain? You're so devastated by this famine, you don't have anything to eat? Well, too bad. No, he gives them grain, but he doesn't charge them for it. He returns their money, and in addition to all of that, he even gives them provision for their journey. Later, after he had revealed his true identity to his brothers, he speaks encouraging words to them. Do you remember? I can't remember if it was Sunday morning, Sunday night. They couldn't speak a kind word to him. They hated him. They knew that he was their father's favorite. They knew that he had given a bad report about them. They hated him because of their father's favoritism. They hated him because of that bad report. And they hated him more than for any other reason because he had these dreams that he would actually rule over them. They couldn't speak a kind word. Chapter 45, verses 10 and 11. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen. You shall be near to me. You and your children, your children's children, your flocks and your herds, all that you have. There I will provide for you, lest you and your household and all that you have come to poverty, for there are still 5 years of this famine. There's a sense in which sometimes we feel the flow of a story. I think of this. I like John Wayne. When I was a little boy, I remember one of my memories with my grandparents is I would go and spend the weekend with them on Saturday mornings and Saturday afternoons. We called my grandfather Pap. We'd sit with Pap and watch Westerns. I love old Westerns. I remember a scene with John Wayne where he says, I'm not going to hit you. And then he turns back and he hits him like, yes, that guy needed to be hit. That guy needed that punch. And sometimes as a story develops and everything within us is this sense of righteous indignation, these boys need somebody to smack them around a little bit. It's not what he does. He said, Goshen's really the best part of the land. I'm going to settle you there. There's 5 more years of this famine. Don't you worry about it. I want you near to me. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to take care of your children. Folks, if you see Jesus in anybody in the Old Testament, can you not see him in Joseph? There's something really remarkable about the ability to overcome a tendency towards revenge. He provides for their journey from Israel to Egypt. The Word of God tells us Joseph gave them carts. He gave them provisions for the journey. He gave to all of them, to each man, changes of garments. When they arrive in Egypt, Joseph situates his father and his brothers, gave them a possession in the land of Egypt. It actually says in the best of the land. He provided his father and his brothers, all his father's household with bread, according to the number of their in their families, along with all these other acts of kindness. Genesis 50 and verse 20, he comforted them. He spoke kindly to them. And he soothed their fearful hearts with reassuring words. Now, therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and for your little ones. They had no need to fear Joseph. That's hard. Maybe in the back of your mind, you can hear the words, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. I understand it, and I admire it. The challenge is, can I do that? Can I get over this hurdle? And can you? Remember earlier I said you can probably, there may be a face that comes to mind. Has there ever been a person who has given you a reason? Not just, I don't like that person. Has there ever been a person, coworker, neighbor, family member, somebody who used to be a close friend but now seems more like an enemy? They hurt you so deeply that you're tempted almost to hate that person. Now, I know we're not supposed to. Listen, I'm not saying we're supposed to. I'm saying, have you ever been so hurt that the feeling you have, it's on the very verge of like an intense hatred? I can't stand that person. They've deceived or betrayed or abandoned or neglected or rejected or forgotten or passed over or unfairly persecuted. When the opportunity presents itself and you finally have the opportunity to hurt the one who hurt you, what do? I'm just telling you. I like this idea of counter-cultural Christianity. I've told my kids for as long as I can remember, we are never going to be like everybody else. If you are following Jesus, you are always going to be different. You're never going to be like the world. And so what do? When we have an opportunity to hurt those who have done so much to hurt us. This is Romans 12, and we'll end with this. Verses 14 through 21. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble. Do not be wise in your own opinion. Repay no one evil for evil. Repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men. If it's possible, as much as it depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath, for it's written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Therefore, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. And if he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. And this is the challenge as we conclude. Do not be overcome by evil. Overcome evil with good. When someone has done us wrong and we're in a position to get even, we finally have an opportunity to exact some measure of revenge. He says, don't do it. In fact, if you have an opportunity to help people who have hurt you, That's what you need to do. Everything in our mind goes, that's not fair. You mean we just let them off the hook? You know what's really happening? When you forgive someone who has sinned against you, do you know who really is being set free? It's not just them. You're finally being freed from all of the bitterness, all of the anger, all of those inclinations towards vengeance and retaliation. When you do that, if my brother were to walk in here, you go, that looks exactly like Tim, but about 3 or 4 inches taller. I mean, we favor each other so much. If you do what we're talking about tonight, people would see Jesus in you. They'd look at you and say, that looks so familiar. Sometimes people who know my brother but don't know me, they know it. They're like, do you have a brother that preaches in Dallas just for fun? I say, no, just to freak them out a little bit. They can see the family. They know him. They've never met me, but in their mind, they're like, those boys have got to be related. Do you know what I think our world really needs desperately? They need to be able to look at us and say, there's something vaguely familiar about these people. And it's not just our system of belief. We need to preach and teach the pattern of Scripture. I'm for that all the way. People where you work, the people in your neighborhood, the people in your family, what they need to see is a lifestyle that is so absurdly different. They take one look at it and go, well, I see Jesus all over that. That those people are clearly related to him. It's easy to sing about. It's easy to teach and preach about. But I'm telling you, what we're talking about tonight's hard to do. Joseph did it. And I'll say it one last time. Anything that has been done can be done. This man got over all of these different hurdles that we've talked about and some that we've not had time for. And if he did it, I can do it. And you can too. I think about the idea of stirring one another up to love and good works, and I hope through the things that we've looked at together this week, that hopefully we've achieved that goal. Thank you.